Hey everybody, my name is Jeremy Bosquez. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about getting your very first camera so that you can start shooting videos for your business. So the camera I want to talk about today is the Panasonic G7. Right now this shot is being filmed on the Panasonic S5. But this shot is being shot on the Panasonic G7. So I want to talk about this camera today, and this could be your very first camera that you could get for your business so that you can start shooting videos and taking better pictures so that you can market your business and make it look professional. So let's go a little bit into the specs on this camera. I know I'm not going to go super deep just because I don't want this video to be about camera specs. I want it to be about practical use and how this camera can be used on an everyday basis. But let's get the specs out of the way so you understand a little bit about it. Now this camera is a 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, and it can shoot 4K video up to 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second in 1080p. It comes with a 14 to 42 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 lens, which on a full frame camera would be basically a 28 millimeter to 84 millimeter lens. And it's usable straight out of the box. Right now I'm filming with the kit lens. So this is the 14 to 42 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 lens. This is the standard picture profile. I've done no color grading or any adjustment at all. This is straight image out of camera. So what makes this camera great for beginners, and especially if you're looking to get a camera for your business? So this camera is actually 7 years old. It came out in 2015. And even though that might seem like a really long time when it comes to technology, the awesome thing is because this camera is already 7 years old, you can get it for a pretty cheap price. In fact, if you go onto Amazon, it's about $700 currently. Now again, at the time of recording, that's what the price is. It may of course be higher depending on if you don't have a Prime membership or if there's no deals going on. Or an even better place you can find this camera is on used websites. So like eBay, or for me especially, I really like to use Facebook Marketplace. You can find this camera for about $300 or even $400 with accessories. In fact, one that I found recently was the G7 with a Rode video mic on top and a Joby tripod. So when it comes to shooting video, audio is just as important as it is for visuals, which means if you're getting a camera and a great shotgun microphone and a tripod all in one, you're basically ready to just hit record and start going. So that was like $400 or $500. That's a steal when it comes to a camera that can shoot 4K video. The other thing that's great about this camera is the battery life on it is awesome. It can last for a good couple hours before you have to worry about it dying. And of course, you can always buy extra batteries if you need them. For my camera, I have 3 batteries, but most of the time when I go and use it for shoots, I never have to use more than one. I also have a DC power adapter so that I can plug it directly into power in an outlet, and then I don't really need to worry about battery at all. But of course, if you don't have access to power, then you don't need to really worry about battery life because it's going to last you pretty much as long as you're going to need it to. It has a fully articulating screen, or I like to call it a flippy screen. Basically what it means is that the screen will flip out. You can turn it so you can look at yourself. That way you know if your shot looks good, your composition looks good, and you're not guessing to wonder if you're in the frame. Now, not all cameras have this. Some cameras, like Sony cameras, have a tilty screen, which means that it just comes out from the back and it tilts up or down, but it doesn't flip out so that you can actually see yourself. So that's a great reason why this camera is good for beginners, especially if you don't really know how to set up your shots well. You can just look at the screen and see if it looks good. I actually use this camera for my second camera angle when I go and do paid video work. There's some examples of some shots here I'll put on screen. You can see what the video quality looks like, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second. But it's a great all-around little camera. It's super small, so you can fit it in a bag super easily. It's very lightweight as well, so you don't need to worry about if you decided to get a gimbal. You got to worry about it not being able to balance properly because it's very light. This is the very first camera that I got, and this was actually the very first camera that I shot my paid video on. I think it was like $250 back in the day, and it worked awesome. I mean, it shot great video. I had to manually focus, which we'll talk about the autofocus here in a second, which is unfortunately one of the cons. But you know, if you understand how to manually focus, or you're not having to run and gun and do a lot of manually focusing on the fly, autofocus doesn't really matter a whole lot. Video quality out of this camera is awesome. Again, right now, this is straight out of camera, so there's no grading at all on this image. It is exactly as it is. Now, of course, I do have some lights on me, and I have some lights behind me and up above, which is going to make the image look better. So if you know how to shape your light, that's definitely going to make your image and your video quality look a lot better. But you don't really need to do a whole lot of tweaking or adjustment because this camera does shoot very good video quality right out of camera itself. And picture-wise, also pictures are great. Now, this camera does have, of course, a bunch of different picture profiles. I'm currently using the standard picture profile, or a lot of times I'll use the Cinelike D picture profile, which is a little bit more contrasty. Unfortunately, this camera cannot shoot in log. Now again, for those of you that are beginners to cameras, log is a very flat picture profile that has a much larger dynamic range. Basically, all that means is that when you go to make any kind of adjustments in editing, well, contrast, saturation, bring up your lights or your shadows, your image is not going to fall apart as much. Now again, this camera can't shoot in log, so you don't have that much flexibility in editing, but again, you don't really need to do a whole lot, especially if you're new and you're beginning to learn how to use cameras and editing. This camera will shoot video awesome just right out of it. So those are some of the good things I like about this camera, but let's talk about the cons. Now, the one con about this camera is because it is a micro four thirds sensor, it's not great in low light situations. Now, for those of you that are new to cameras, the sensor size essentially is how much light is hitting your sensor and how your camera processes that image. So a micro four thirds sensor, of course, is relatively small. I don't know the exact dimensions, and I'm not going to really give them to you. If you want to look it up, you can go onto Google and go and look up what a micro four thirds sensor size is. But the typical camera that I use is my Panasonic S5, which is this camera, and this is a full frame camera. So basically all that means is that the sensor is larger, which means it can gather more light. So in low light situations, if it's evening or it's dark, your image is still going to look very good. Whereas on the Panasonic G7, because it's a micro four thirds sensor, in low light situations, if you're shooting at night or it's dark, you're going to have a lot of noise in your image, a lot of little pixely things. It's just not going to look nearly as good. So you do need to understand that this camera is going to be best used during the daytime, or if you have a scenario where you can set up lights and make it bright enough that it's going to look good. That's how you're going to get your cleanest image out of this camera. The other thing about this camera is the autofocus. Now, the autofocus on this camera is not great. Panasonic is not super well known for its autofocus like Canon and Sony. But when you're doing a talking head video like this, where you're not really moving a whole lot, the autofocus will work just fine. Or a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just set it to manual focus and make sure that, of course, it's focused on me, and then I'll start talking, and I really don't need to worry about autofocus. So I wouldn't recommend using this camera like if you're going to be moving around a lot, or you're filming a subject that's going to be coming closer, coming or going away, because the autofocus is going to hunt a lot, and it's just not going to look good. Now, I've heard that it does work better in the 1080p resolution. I typically only use this camera in 4K, so I actually don't know if the autofocus is better in 1080p, but there are other videos you can look up where I'll talk more about that. The last thing about this camera that also is a little bit of a downside is that it does only record in MP4 format. Now, what that means is that, again, when you go into editing, you just don't have as much flexibility on adjusting colors and contrast and saturation and things like that before the image does start to kind of fall apart. You start getting artifacts in there. Now, again, for someone who is just getting a camera, or you've never owned one before, you're getting one for your business, you're probably not going to be doing a whole lot of grading or coloring or adjusting, so I wouldn't really worry too much about it. In fact, the MP4 format works great with a lot of editors because you don't need to do any kind of codec transformation or conversion, whereas my Panasonic S5, this camera does shoot in the MOV format as well as MP4, and the MOV format is great for adjusting and things in editing, but for some editors, it's not usable. So you actually have to convert the MOV file into an MP4 file before you can use it. And again, if you're just starting out with editing and cameras, your editor is probably a relatively beginner-friendly one, which means the MP4 format will actually work better than the MOV format. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea about how this camera operates, the pros, the cons. And of course, the golden question is, would I recommend this camera for someone who's looking to get one for their business in 2022? Absolutely, yes. This camera is affordable, it's small, it's lightweight, it shoots great video and high quality images at 4K resolution, and it's got a flippy screen and all the good things that you need. So Absolutely. If you're looking to get your very first camera for your business to take good video and take good images, this is a great one to start with. It's not going to break the bank and you're going to be happy with it. It'll last you for a few years before you decide that maybe you want to upgrade. Now, if you need help learning how to utilize video for your business, go check out my other videos and make sure you subscribe to my channel where I try to post one video a week where I go deeper into video strategy for businesses and marketing. Also, if you're interested in learning how to utilize your social media more for your business, go check out my free resource, which is my social media guide for beginners. I go into all the different platforms on social media and each one's specialty. I give you 30 different days and ideas of posts you can put on your social media, as well as some tips and tricks and some free resources that you can utilize to make better looking content. Thank you for watching. I hope this video helped you to come to a decision on whether or not you want to use the Panasonic G7 as your first camera. Otherwise, if not, there are plenty of other cameras out there. So, thanks. I'm Jeremy Bosquez for Jemsmagics Media, and I'll see you in the next one.